Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and we now have a huge amount of information that ties Israel to the possible assassination of Charlie Kirk. Initially, we had small amounts of information. Some of the things Charlie Kirk said, some of the statements that were made by his friends, such as Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and various others. But I now have an inside source that ties significant amount of information to the possibility that there was an Israeli assassination of Charlie Kirk. The inside source is that Charlie Kirk pushed against Israeli interests, and we're going to speak about those more later in this video. But initially, let's get down to the start of it. The first thing is Charlie Kirk starts speaking out against Jewish interests, Jewish American interests in the United States of America. He spoke about how left-wing Jews were essentially causing mass immigration into the United States and were perpetuating and promoting anti-white hatred.
Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. Now, I don't like generalizations. Not every Jewish person believes that. But it is true the Anti-Defamation League was part and parcel with Black Lives Matter. It is true that some of the largest financiers of left-wing anti-white causes have been Jewish Americans. They went all in on woke, and it wasn't just ADL. It was some of the top Jewish organizations in the country that have done that. In fact, we have seen this with the recent retreat of Jewish donations that are no longer going to be administered to colleges, right? Mark Rowan, Leon Copperman. Can we get that full list? It's very powerful. The part of the, so that's totally true. And by the way, Tucker Carlson reinforces this. So I'm going to kind of, it was quite a day on the internet. Tucker Carlson was interviewing Candace Owens. We have Candace Owens coming up next hour. And Tucker Carlson mentions Jewish Americans have primarily been financing cultural Marxist ideas. We said this, by the way, last week, and people came after us.
We were on top of it.
We actually said it in a different way. We said, I'm glad that Jewish Americans are reconsidering their financing of cultural Marxism. And people misunderstood it intentionally and slandered us as being anti-Semites. But listen to this. Tucker Carlson is completely correct by saying this, that the philosophical foundation of anti-whiteness has been largely financed by Jewish donors.
This culminated in a large number of donors who pushed out or pulled out of the funding of TPUSA, the organization that Charlie Kirk had built, which essentially was an organization that was there to promote Jewish Zionist interests, that was there to speak positively about the state of Israel. But that wasn't enough. Any kind of dissent, any kind of disagreement was pushed back against. And this was an example of a scenario where key mega donors of TPUSA were just not happy with the statements made by Charlie Kirk, some of which I've now mentioned. This resulted in a number of large mega donors pulling out, such as Bernard Marcus, the co-founder of Home Depot, such as Michael Levine, such as the Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco. So we had these mega donors that pulled out initially. This was after October the 7th. Charlie Kirk, according to many people, was evolving. For example, he questioned the actions that occurred on October the 7th in terms of, was there a stand-down order by Israel?
I've been to Israel many times. The whole country's a fortress. When I first heard this story, I still had the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that is an IDF soldier. Right? The whole country is surveilled. And so let me just kind of go through this. We don't talk about Israeli politics very often, and most Americans don't know this. The last 9 months, Israel was on the brink of civil war. It's not an exaggeration. This judicial stuff, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets because Bibi Netanyahu was basically redefining the Israeli constitution. That's not an exaggeration, right? He said the judicial branch has too much power. There were protests planned this week against Netanyahu, where they anticipated tens of thousands of people to take to the streets. That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an emergency government and a mandate to lead. I'm not willing to go so far that saying that Netanyahu knew or there was intelligence here, but I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand down order? Was there a stand down order? 6 hours? I don't believe it. Israel's the size of New Jersey. When I took a helicopter ride from Jerusalem to the Gaza border, it's 45 minutes. Wow. 6 hours. They're live streaming the killing of Jews. Did somebody in the government say stand down? That is a legitimate, non-conspiracy question. The whole country is the IDF. The whole country is.
Yeah.
And you're trying to tell me that they're going to concerts and kibbutzes and schools and by report.
He spoke about Epstein and the possible connections to Mossad, and Giselle Maxwell and her possible connections to Mossad and Israeli intelligence.
Realize that Epstein, with his little friend Ghislaine and Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, who was obviously a spy of the Israeli intelligence agencies, that there was something else going on here. Epstein was not some sort of whiz kid hedge fund manager. Epstein was playing a part. Epstein was a LARPer. Epstein was cast for a specific role, and he played it really well. The sweatpants and the Harvard jacket, the kind of disheveled hair, looking as if he was so smart and above the clouds that he was doing advanced mathematic equations on the back of napkins. But if you actually go into some of the videos of people that met with Epstein at the time, they said he was awfully unimpressive when it came to finance and markets and economics. And it's nothing new that if you're in the intel agencies, you want to try and get as much blackmail on powerful people as possible. Easy, not hard. And this is no longer just speculation. First of all, the evidence that shows that Epstein was a creation of either Mossad, Israeli intelligence, American intelligence, Saudi intelligence, or maybe he was just a hired gun. Maybe he was just the guy that countries would go to and park a couple $100 million and say, hey, can you get one of the members of the royal family with a 13-year-old so we can get them to do what we want to do? Members of Congress are actively being blackmailed. The Epstein playbook is being used on a daily basis. Jeffrey Epstein was not a financier. He was not a hedge fund manager. Jeffrey Epstein was a key player in a multi-decade blackmail operation against the most powerful people on the planet.
Just 24 hours before he was assassinated, he spoke to Ben Shapiro and spoke about possible ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
One thing a friend sent to me, interestingly, which is, okay, Charlie, we've pushed back against the media on COVID, on lockdowns, on Ukraine, on the border, so like, maybe we should also ask a question. Is the media totally presenting the truth when it comes to Israel? Just a question, that maybe we shouldn't believe everything the media says, because I know I've been conditioned to ask a lot more critical questions over the last couple of years. So, Ben, some people would accuse Israel of wanting to ethnically cleanse.
And what's more than that, he'd spoke about this previously on the PBD podcast.
Is now Bibi and the Israeli hard right government has a mandate. I gotta be careful the way I say this. They're gonna try to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, I don't use that term lightly, okay? They're talking about basically removing 2.5 million people, okay?
And so all of this culminated in people trying to piece together information that seemed to suggest that he was moving away from his strong-willed, ardent position of being a pro-Israel advocate. For me, that wasn't enough. I just felt like that wasn't enough information to demonstrate or link Israel to the possible assassination of Charlie Kirk. But then I had a source that came to me and provided me with some key information that actually does suggest that it would have been important and imperative for Israel to assassinate Charlie Kirk because he became a major liability. And we'll speak about that in a second. But before we do, one of the things that annoyed a number of the donors, including Mariam Edelson, and also annoyed a vast number of pro-Israel advocates such as Bill Ackman, was the platforming of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Dave Smith at TPUSA. These people were considered anti-Semites. They were considered people who were vocally speaking out against the interests of Israel. And Charlie Kirk platforming them was seen as a major problem. So for that reason, they pushed back against it, they disagreed against it, and they wanted him to no longer platform him. He received a huge number of messages pushing back against this. He was on the Megyn Kelly show where he said this.
You probably get the negative, oh, you're just shilling for Israel, whatever. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do what's right regardless of the feedback, right? But then all of a sudden, like, I host a person that I moderate the debate of, mind you, right? And I give equal time to Josh Hammer, equal time to a pro-Israel advocate, and my moral character is being put into question. And so I think it's a hyper paranoid, like, we're just going to try to, we're going to just stamp out everything type of practice. But it goes to the point where, if, for example, if I have less ability sometimes online to criticize the Israeli government without backlash than actual Israelis do. And that's really, really weird, isn't it, Megan? That's not
so
right.
Wrong-headed.
And so, as you can see, he disagreed with this almost bullying type tactics that were imposed on him by the pro-Israeli lobby, by donors. And he said it wasn't just one message, it was multiple messages that spoke out against what had happened, or spoke out against the fact that he was platforming people who were vastly against Israel. Now, what I was told was that Charlie Kirk, during the war between Israel and Iran, the 12-day war, a war was saw Israel versus Iran, and Israel struggled in that war. They required significant amount of support from the United States of America and the UK. And as you saw, other than the surprise attack, Iran completely proliferated and destroyed Tel Aviv and various other areas within Israel with a large number of hypersonic missiles. One of the things they wanted and one of the things they needed was for the US to intervene, the US to impose themselves on Iran, and the US to go to war with Iran. They wanted a significant war with Iran. Now, the problem was that key advocates such as Charlie Kirk were against the war with Iran.
We put them in power. We displaced the Shah. We displaced the democratically elected leader Mossadegh and put in the Shah, which then, of course, led to the Ayatollahs of Iran. And then finally, is a nuclear weapon against Iran a threat to America? Probably. Could be. It's a threat to Israel, but is it a threat to America? I mean, India has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. So is it worth a potential another war with Iran? And the people that are, let's just say, advocates for preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon by all means necessary, they're the same architects that were perfectly fine with the Iraq War, the same designers of the Iraq War. The primary way Iran can hurt this country is by sucking us into another Middle East quagmire, and they know it. And Iran would have the potential to be the worst Middle East quagmire of all time. Iran has 90 million people. That's more than 3 times as big as Iraq was when we invaded 22 years ago. It's larger than both Afghanistan and Iraq combined, both in population and in area. Iraq was at least mostly a flat country. It's a bunch of cities along a couple rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Iran isn't like that. It's almost all mountains. Iran has spent decades preparing specifically for war with the United States. Their military has lots of weapons designed for fighting a much stronger adversary. They have a lot of drones, a lot of speedboats, a lot of cheap, expendable weapons. They're far more formidable than Iraq or the Taliban were. And I seriously want your thoughts. Email me, freedom@charliekirk.com. Would you say it's a good idea to use military force to strike potential Iranian nuclear targets? My whole life, I've been told that Iran is getting a bomb. Iran is getting a bomb. Iran is getting a bomb. Iran is getting a nuclear bomb. And yet here in 2025, they do not have a nuclear bomb. So why should we trust the American intelligence without verifying it? Now, the other side of the argument is, Iran is this big threat. The same people that told us that Iraq was a big threat, the same people that told us the Taliban was a big threat. I'll be honest, fine. I mean, I don't like Iran, but the evidence shows that every single one of these people, the last couple of decades, that is pushing for a conflict with Iran has not just failed miserably, has been one of the greatest catastrophes in American foreign policy ever. Thousands of lives needlessly lost of Americans, millions of people displaced, trillions of dollars spent. And let's be honest, at this particular moment, we cannot afford this war. We are economically vulnerable. There is massive de-dollarization happening. We're trying a difficult manufacturing pivot with tariffs. We've seen the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. We blew our military reserves in Ukraine. And now is the time that all of a sudden we want to try to get involved in another endless conflict. Let me be clear. It will not end with just military strikes. If you strike Iran on the interior, you will have a war. That is an act of war. And if that's what you want, that's fine. Make your case.
My source tells me is that a large number of people around Trump were actually supportive of American intervention into the war with Iran. Charlie Kirk being one of the key people who was vocally against it. Publicly, he did speak about supporting the decision of the president. And there were some videos where he kind of demonstrated disagreement about US intervention, but agreed that there must be some form of stopping Iran getting nuclear weapons. And this is what annoyed a number of Zionist commentators. For example, Laura Loomer said, Charlie Kirk is speaking from both sides of his mouth. And she wasn't happy about his statements about Iran and TPUSA. So he put in key people who were against Israel and platforming them in TPUSA. What we had was Charlie Kirk was privately against the war with Iran. He spoke to Donald Trump about it. Max Blumenthal claims that that meeting was so aggressive that Trump basically threw him out. Now, my source doesn't say that. My source says that he spoke to Donald Trump and he thought that it was a problem that the US shouldn't go to war with Iran. The US shouldn't basically put US troops' lives on the line for Israel. And also, financially, the United States of America couldn't afford it. And so because of these key reasons, he was against the war with Iran. What happened was, it seems like Trump heeded his advice. Either it was just him, either it was a number of people, but that advice was taken on board, because if you saw, Trump took an off-ramp and didn't go to war with Iran. He bombed a few key sites, nuclear sites, and then removed the US from the war, and that forced Israel onto the table. Now, many geopolitical experts, including myself, hold the position that they will and do plan to go to war with Iran again. And you can't have somebody who is going to counter that narrative, who is so close to Trump, who may stop Trump going to war with Iran. And therefore, he becomes a huge problem. If you understand Israel, you know that their entire ideology is based on expansionism. It's based on the Greater Israel Project. It's about broadening their region and geographical area, but also taking out anybody that sees a threat. And Iran is the biggest threat to Israel. Israel now knows that they can't take on Iran themselves. They need outside intervention. They need the support of the United States of America. Charlie Kirk is one of those people who is a problem when it comes to wanting to go to war with Iran. And therefore, taking him out made a lot of sense. And what I mean by that is they were at a crossroads. There was two decisions. One is you allow what is happening to continue to occur, which is Charlie Kirk moving away from the pro-Israel position. Now, it doesn't mean that he was going to be anti-Israel or pro-Palestine. No one's arguing that. But he was moving away from a couple of key issues. One is the war with Iran. The second is Israeli intervention into US politics. And so for that reason, they saw him as a problem, as a liability. This was a guy who controlled the hearts and minds of the vast majority of Gen X in the United States of America. And so when you've got somebody who is able to control and impact so much of the youth, a youth that is moving away from Israel in huge numbers, you need to either A, realign him. And it does seem like there was a number of moves made to try and bring him back into the fold. There is a post in the New York Post that says that a rabbi, he spoke to a rabbi the day before about pro-Israel positions, and Charlie Kirk was quite aggressive and pushed back against those positions. And so many attempts were made to bring him back into the fold. It seemed like he wasn't amiable to it. And therefore, the other option is that you basically take him out, assassinate him, and therefore you no longer have that problem. You can go to war with Iran. You don't have somebody who is dissenting against that. You can continue to have American control without somebody pushing back against it. Key things that happened immediately after his assassination was Netanyahu came out and he immediately sent his condolences. He then brandished a letter and said that Charlie Kirk wrote us a beautiful letter being supportive of Israel. Candace Owens came out and said, actually, you are lying by omission. There are a number of things in that letter that you've not told or spoke about that speak against Israel, speak against their actions, and therefore be honest. In addition to that, Charlie Kirk rejected an invitation by Netanyahu to go to Israel. Charlie Kirk rejected $150 million from the state of Israel in order to push TPUSA, and that's significant. With $150 million, imagine what you can do. Imagine how you can build your organization out to a more significant manner than you already have. But he thought that this was blackmail. He thought this was bribery, and therefore he rejected it. He wanted to put American interests first. Therefore, he became a liability. And so I believe that when you look at the motive behind it, this is the strongest motive. It is that he's going to stop the war with Iran. He stopped the previous war with Iran. He is now questioning Israeli control over the United States of America. And you saw many of his mega donors, the last of whom is Mariam Edelson, pull out. You saw a significant amount of pushback from Israelis, from Jewish Zionists, from Jewish influencers who were Zionists against his position, and he became a problem and a liability, and therefore that's the reason I believe that they took him out. We're going to give you more information and more videos on this, because information in regards to the Israeli connection to the assassination of Charlie Kirk is coming in thick and fast.